What would you do if you discovered that reality isn't as solid as you thought? That sometimes the past bleeds into the present like wet ink on paper, leaving stains that can never be erased? Anna Thompson was about to learn this lesson in the most terrifying way possible. Through the lens of her camera, she would glimpse something that should have remained hidden, a figure that had been watching, waiting, and grinning from the shadows of time itself. It began on what should have been an ordinary Thursday afternoon. The kind of autumn day that photographers dream about, golden light painting the city in warm hues, long shadows stretching across the sidewalks like reaching fingers. Anna was walking home from her job at the local newspaper, her camera bag bumping rhythmically against her hip when she heard it. The music floated through the air like a ghost of memory, an old accordion player at the corner of 5th and Main, his weathered fingers dancing across the keys. He sat there, eyes closed, lost in a melody that seemed to belong to another era entirely. The kind of song that makes you think of sepia photographs and forgotten dance halls. Anna couldn't resist capturing the moment, just one quick photo with her phone. Something about the way the light caught the accordion's polished surface, how the old man's shadows seemed to merge with those of the passing crowd. It wasn't until later that evening, curled up on her couch with a glass of wine, that she noticed him. There, in the background of her perfect shot, stood a man who shouldn't have been there. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an impeccable pinstriped suit that seemed to belong to another time. His fedora was tilted at just the right angle to cast his eyes in shadow, but his smile, that smile was perfectly visible. A knowing curve of lips that suggested he had been waiting for her to notice him. Anna zoomed in, her wine forgotten. Something about him felt wrong. Not just his clothing, which looked like it had stepped straight out of a 1920s photograph, but his very presence. He seemed too sharp, too in focus compared to the blur of modern pedestrians around him. As if he existed on a different plane of reality altogether. The next day brought another opportunity for a photograph. This time at the Daily Grind, her favorite coffee shop. The kind of place where the espresso machines hissed like ancient steam engines and the afternoon light filtered through vintage stained glass windows, creating pools of colored light on the worn wooden floors. Anna ordered her usual, a caramel latte with an extra shot. The barista, Sarah, had created a perfect heart in the foam. It was too beautiful not to photograph. But when she checked the image, her blood ran cold. There he was again, standing outside the window, leaning against a lamppost with casual elegance. Same suit, same fedora, same unsettling smile. Only this time he was closer, much closer, and his hands began to shake. She looked up quickly, scanning the street outside, but there was no sign of him. Just the usual crowd of business people and students hurrying past. When she looked back at her phone, though, he was still there, watching, waiting, grinning. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Anna lay in bed, scrolling through her photo gallery, her thumb trembling slightly as she moved from image to image. What she discovered made her throat close up with terror. He was in every single photo she'd taken that week. Every single one. In Monday's picture of the sunrise over the city skyline, there he was, a dark silhouette against the morning light. In Tuesday's snap of the flower vendor's colorful display, he stood across the street, partially hidden behind a newspaper. In Wednesday's photo of her lunch with friends, he sat at a distant table, his face turned toward her. With each image, he was getting closer. Moving through the crowd like a shark through water, drawn inexorably toward her. And that smile, that terrible, knowing smile never changed. Then she found it, a photo she had no memory of taking. It showed her own living room, taken from the corner near her bookshelf. She was sitting on the couch, right where she was sitting now, looking down at her phone. And behind her, standing in the shadows, was the man in the pinstriped suit. His hand was reaching toward her shoulder, frozen just inches away from touching her. Anna ran, out of her apartment, down the stairs, into the street. The night air was cold against her face, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Her feet carried her through empty streets and dark alleys, past closed shops and silent houses. Finally, she collapsed onto a bench in Central Park, her lungs burning. The park was deserted at this hour, the lamplights creating islands of yellow in a sea of darkness. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. "Running won't help, Anna. I've been running for nearly a century. I know how this ends." The next day, Anna called in sick to work. She spent hours at the public library, diving into old newspapers and historical records. Her hands shook as she scrolled through microfiche, scanning headlines from the 1920s and 30s. And then she found it, a yellowed photograph that made her heart stop. The Chicago Tribune, September 1931. There he was, standing next to Al Capone outside a courthouse. The caption read, "Frank, the enforcer Nitti, Capone's right-hand man, leaves federal court." It was impossible. The man in her photos couldn't be Frank Nitti. Nitti had died in 1943. She found the obituary to prove it. But there was no denying the resemblance, the same sharp features, the same impeccable suit, the same unsettling smile. More articles followed. Stories of Nitti's rise through the ranks of the Chicago outfit, his reputation as the man who got things done, the enforcer who never forgot a face, the one who would wait patiently, sometimes for years, to settle a score. That night, the dream started. She found herself walking through streets that weren't quite her own. The buildings were older, the cars vintage, the air smelled of coal smoke and illegal whiskey. In the distance, she could hear jazz music spilling from hidden doorways and the sound of laughter that carried an edge of desperation. And always, she could feel him behind her, following, waiting, drawing closer with each step. She would wake up gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat, only to find new messages on her phone. "Sweet dreams, Anna. Did you enjoy the tour of my time? Soon, you'll understand why I chose you." Her friend Sophie was the only one she dared tell. They sat in Anna's living room, the curtains drawn tight against the gathering darkness as Anna showed her the photos. "This isn't possible," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "There has to be some explanation, some app or filter that's doing this." But they both knew better. The man in the photos was too real, too present. He cast shadows that interacted perfectly with their surroundings. His presence altered the light in ways that no filter could achieve. That's when Anna noticed something else, something that made her stomach lurch. She pulled out her old photo albums, childhood birthdays, family vacations, graduation day. He was there too, standing in the background of photos taken decades ago, watching her grow up, waiting for the right moment. The final confrontation came on a Friday night. Anna and Sophie had decided to face whatever this was head-on. They went to the park where she'd first noticed him, armed with cameras in desperate courage. The air was thick with fog, turning the streetlights into ghostly halos. Anna raised her camera with trembling hands and took a picture of the empty path. When she checked the screen, he was there, closer than ever, his smile wider, more terrible. Then came the laugh, low, gravelly, echoing across the years themselves. Anna's phone buzzed one final time. The message read simply, "Turn around." She did. There he stood, as real as the ground beneath her feet. The fog seemed to curl around him like a living thing, and his eyes held the weight of decades of darkness. "I've been watching you for so long, Anna," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "Waiting for the right moment, for someone who could see me, really see me. Someone who could understand what it means to exist between moments, between times." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a photograph. Black and white, yet somehow moving, changing as Anna watched. It showed a scene from the 1930s, a busy street, Model T cars, women in long dresses. And there in the crowd was Anna. Not as she was now, but as she would have been if she'd lived in his time. Same face, different era. And she was smiling that same terrible smile. "You see, Anna, some of us don't belong to just one time. We exist in the spaces between moments, in the shadows between seconds. And now that you've seen me, now that you've really seen me, you're one of us too." They found Anna's camera the next day, sitting on a park bench. Every photo in its memory showed the same image, Anna and the Grinning Man standing together in scenes from the past. Sometimes in Chicago speakeasies, sometimes in dark alleys, sometimes in places that existed only in the spaces between time. Sophie was the only one who knew the truth. She kept Anna's original photos, the ones that showed the grinning man getting closer and closer. Sometimes, late at night, she swears the images change. That Anna and the grinning man move closer to the edges of the frames, watching, waiting. But that's not the end of the story. You see, last week, Sophie took a photograph of her morning coffee. And there, in the background, barely visible through the cafe window, were two figures. A man in a pinstriped suit, and a woman in a 1930s dress, both of them grinning, both of them watching. So the next time you take a photograph, look carefully at what's in the background. Pay attention to the shadows, to the spaces between moments, because you never know who might be watching, or who might be choosing you next. And if you ever see a man in a pinstriped suit, standing still among the moving crowd, wearing a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, don't take his picture. Because once you see him, once you really see him, he'll never stop seeing you.